Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was released in 1937 by Walt Disney Productions and was their first animated feature in a long line of animated films that continues to this day, and stars Adriana Caselotti as the titular Snow White, Lucille Laverne as the Evil Queen, and a slew of other talented voice actors as the Seven Dwarfs, and is based on the Brothers Grimm fairy tale of the same name, and as such, follows the character of Snow White, who has been sentenced to die by the Evil Queen, but when the huntsman who was sent to kill her can no longer do what he was asked, Snow White flees into the forest where she comes upon a cottage where the Seven Dwarfs live and quickly befriends them, all while the Evil Queen seeks out her vengeance on Snow White in an attempt to become the fairest of them all. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs has the luxury of not only being the first animated feature film by Disney, but also being the first cel animated feature film ever produced, making it one of the most important films ever made, as animation as we know it today would not be the same without it. I completely agree with this, obviously. Snow White is an important piece of film history, which makes sense why it would be on so many lists for the greatest films of all time. And although I can admire it now for what it accomplished in 1937 and the brilliant animation, which in some ways I feel has still never been topped, I believe there are films that Disney has put out since then that have far surpassed it. But we must give credit where credit is due. So, as we always do, let's talk a little about what went on behind the scenes of this animated classic before we get into my own thoughts on the film. Development for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs began as far back as 1934 when Walt Disney himself announced the project as his first feature film. Before this, the studio had only been involved in producing animated shorts such as Mickey Mouse and their Silly Symphony series. It was Disney's hope that a feature film would help elevate the studio in terms of prestige and revenue. The film was a huge gamble from the start. It was estimated that the film would cost the studio roughly $250,000 to make, which was 10 times the budget of the average Silly Symphony. But soon that cost would balloon to nearly $1.5 million, making it one of the most expensive films at the time. It was quickly being seen as Disney's folly by the press before it even reached theaters. Production for Snow White went through some interesting early phases. In 1934, Disney famously acted out the entire story he had envisioned in his head to his staff and eventually made the ultimate draw of the film put solely on the dwarves themselves, as they would serve as the film's main attraction. Great attention was placed on the dwarves very early on, and since the dwarves in the original story had no personalities of their own, Disney and his team would create them based on particular personality traits that they would be named after. Eventually, there was a list of nearly 50 potential names, I think, but through a process of elimination, it was cut down to 7 we see in the film. In many ways, the original outlines for Snow White made an attempt to stay truer to the original Grimm fairy tale, but changes were made to give the film a personal touch that only the Disney team could give. And there was eventually a large focus on gags for the film, but they wanted to not go so far as to lessen the plausibility of any of the characters. At first, it seemed the Seven Dwarfs would end up being the main focus of the story. However, this was eventually changed to make the main thrust of the story be the conflict between the Evil Queen and Snow White. As such, there were many sequences developed for the dwarves which were scrapped in favor of this renewed focus. When it came to the animation, Albert Herder was the main authority on the film's design, and it had to be approved by him before being finalized. The concept artists Ferdinand Horvath and Gustav Tengren contributed to the film as well. Tengren, in particular, being inspired by the styles of artist Arthur Rackham and John Bauer, who possessed the European style Disney was looking for in his animated fairy tale. The film would also use rotoscoping to provide realistic movement to the characters. This was done through a process of animating over real performers, which is how we get some of the cleanest movements in the film. The music for the film was composed by Frank Churchill and Larry Morey, who provided us with the film's memorable tracks, including Hi Ho, Someday My Prince Will Come, and Whistle While You Work, which have all become classic songs that pretty much the whole world knows. The film had its premiere at the Carthay Circle Theater on December 21st, 1937, and received glowing praise and a standing ovation. The film's early success led the distributor RKO Radio to give the film a general release where it became a major box office success and earned $4.2 million in the US and Canada in its initial release, and would go on to be the most successful sound film of all time before being dethroned by Gone with the Wind just a few years later. Through multiple re-releases through the years, Disney has accumulated so much money from the film that as of now, the film sits with a box office profit of $418 million, making it one of the most successful films, and especially animated films, ever made. What was first seen as Disney's folly had become the most important film for Disney, as it allowed the company to move on to even more ambitious projects that still continue even now. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is now a film loved by millions and seen as a timeless classic and an important milestone in the history of film, with a legacy that will never die. So, with all that backstory out of the way, let's get into my thoughts on this film. This is my second time reviewing Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs on this channel, and in the time since I last watched it, my opinion has pretty much remained the same as before, but I wanted to make a review that was more in tune with the new style I've adopted for my videos, and go into a bit more detail, and be a bit more organized overall. I also had the pleasure of watching this film again with my girlfriend and talking to her about the film. I was able to pinpoint a lot of the things I love and also don't necessarily care for in this film. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is considered a classic by many film scholars and film enthusiasts. It's seen as one of the greatest films ever made. Greatest animated film ever made, even. One of the most important, most influential, and I can both agree and disagree with these sentiments. Snow White is important. It is a monumental achievement. It might even be one of the greatest films ever made. But it's also a film I can't really connect with, but one I have a lot of respect for nonetheless. Right from the start, something I love about the older Disney princess movies is how they start out using a storybook that opens up into the film we are watching. It's just a powerful image, and when the book finally closes at the end of the film, you really get the feeling like you've watched some old classic story. I think it adds to the classic storybook nature of the film that's so well known at this point as a trademark of Disney films that DreamWorks eventually spoofed it in their own fairy tale outing, Shrek. My favorite parts of the film have to be the first and third acts, which really hold the film together with some great thematic storytelling, beautiful imagery, music, and character moments. Just the opening of the film alone is something special and instantly iconic, with the evil queen standing before the mirror asking if she is the fairest one of all. I love the use of smoke and shadow. The fact that this is all implemented using animation is just incredible. Follow that up with the scene of Snow White in the clearing when the huntsman has been sent to kill her. You see this innocent image of Snow White lying with the flowers, while in the background the huntsman stands there silhouetted against a dark background. You just know something horrible is about to happen, and visually you can see that even the huntsman isn't prepared to do what he's been asked. The whole sequence ends with him telling Snow White to flee, and she runs deep into the woods where we get these terrifying images as the trees take on these dark and twisted looks, symbolizing Snow White's fear of the evil queen. It's just a great series of events overall, and I think it perfectly sets up the story. The third act is also filled with some great tension and suspense, like when the evil queen, now dressed as the old woman, comes to the cottage to give Snow White the poisoned apple, as all the animals in the forest race to find the dwarfs to tell them about the evil queen's intentions. It's fantastic and ends with the horrifying image of Snow White falling to the ground, entering an eternal slumber due to the effects of the apple. And what follows is a wonderfully animated sequence of the dwarves chasing the evil queen onto a cliff while a bolt of lightning strikes the cliff face, sending the evil queen to her death. And to make things even better, they have these two vultures that smile as the queen falls to her death, and when they know she's perished, they begin circling the sky. The film's ending is also one of the saddest and most uplifting of Disney's endings, as the dwarves all sit around the lifeless Snow White and mourn her passing, and even Grumpy, who has been the most disagreeable of the dwarves at this point, breaks down, and it's really great. But things are all set aside when the prince comes and with true love's first kiss brings Snow White back from the jaws of death. It's a combination of the emotions of the scene, the score, and the animation that make this moment truly one of the greatest endings to any movie. And that image of the prince taking Snow White to the castle in the sky is an image that will never leave me. I also need to give credit where credit is due. The evil queen in this movie is just wonderfully evil. There's ultimately not too much to this character, but Lucille Laverne brings such a presence to the role of the evil queen, making her a very memorable villain that is both beautiful and ugly because of her heart being so wicked. There's many more things to appreciate about the film. I love how well defined the dwarves are. They're all unique and memorable in their own way, and at many points save the second act from being a complete drag. The music is also beautiful and timeless, and I'm specifically talking about the score itself and not the songs. There's a grandness to it that elevates the material, but for me, the true star of this film is its gorgeous animation. The film is just beautiful to look at, from the lush backgrounds to the fluent animations and use of rotoscoping. Snow White is a film that, on a purely visual level, still looks even better today and still holds up with animation that even puts more recent animated films to shame. It's all in the details, the coloring, and the fluidity that makes it stand out. I would go so far as to say this is one of the best looking Disney films, period. Now, sadly, we have to get into the things I don't necessarily love about the film that drag it down for me. So let's start with talking about the dwarfs. I mentioned already that they are fun and well defined, but sometimes I find the film relies too heavily on them in scenes. And it's clear that it's a carryover from when the film was originally going to focus mainly on the dwarves. And based off of the scenes we do have with the dwarves, I think that would have ultimately have been a bad idea for the film. The second act is also very much a drag, and this is mainly a result of using the dwarves for gags, which again was the original goal for the dwarves, and it ruins a lot of the brilliant pacing in the first and third acts. There are moments that are good sprinkled throughout, but it can't save the whole second act for me. As for the music, I praised it earlier, and the songs are very good. But I do find that some songs are stronger than others. Now, this completely comes down to personal preference, but I'm not really a fan of the Betty Boopish singing from Snow White. It's not bad. The singing is good, but it's not something I particularly enjoy listening to. Ultimately, I think the film suffers from being a test run for what would be improved in later films like Pinocchio. It ends up feeling like a series of shorts strung together to make a feature-length film. Scenes in the second act, I think, end up lasting a bit too long, and it causes the film to drag in the middle. In the end, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is not a masterpiece, but it has all the pieces there that would be improved in later Disney outings. The animation is beautiful. The story has moments of greatness, and though I can never say I really love this film, I appreciate what it accomplished all the way back in 1937 and paved the way for animation in the future. The world wouldn't be the same without this film, and I think it does deserve its place as one of the most important films ever made. I just don't think it's one of Disney's best. And with all that said, I'm going to give Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs a 7 out of 10. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is a great film, but I don't think I could ever say I love it. But what do you guys think about it? I'd love to know, and I hope this new review makes my thoughts on the film a bit clearer to everyone, and I'd like to do the same with the previous Disney films I've already reviewed on this channel, so look forward to those reviews coming soon, as well as new movie reviews. But anyway, as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and stay positive.